I'm sorry, but we can't understand you. Could you try? In English, the receptionist's voice was a thin, taut wire of controlled panic stretched across the cavernous, marble-floored lobby of the Imperial Hotel. Her eyes, professionally trained to be welcoming, darted nervously toward the small, well-dressed crowd that was beginning to form around the check-in counter. It was a tableau of contained chaos, a silent, slow-motion car crash of cultural misunderstanding and corporate anxiety. At the center of the storm stood a Japanese woman, small and still, dressed in a severe, impeccably tailored navy blue suit. Her hands were politely clasped in front of her, a picture of serene composure. But her eyes, sharp and inscrutable, scanned the growing tension like a general studying a battlefield, missing nothing, betraying nothing. Behind her, a young male assistant in a dark suit typed frantically on his smartphone, his brow furrowed with a mixture of embarrassment and desperation. In the background, two of the hotel's on-call translators whispered furiously to each other, their faces flushed with the crimson of professional failure. They were completely, utterly lost. Should we call security? One junior staff member whispered to another behind the polished granite counter. She's not being aggressive. The other whispered back, her gaze fixed on the motionless woman, but she refuses to answer in English, or French, or even Mandarin, and she's booked a presidential suite, for God's sake. Across the lobby, near a gleaming pyramid of golden luggage carts, Lucia Santos watched the scene unfold in silence. She moved with a quiet, practiced grace, wiping the edge of a glass-topped table with a soft, clean cloth. Her gray cleaning uniform was a masterpiece of social camouflage, designed to blend into the opulent environment like wallpaper. People don't see cleaners. That was the first unwritten rule of the job, especially in a place like the Imperial Hotel, where luxury was measured not just in the thread count of the sheets or the chill of the champagne, but in who was permitted to be seen and who was required to be invisible. Lucia was only 32, but her eyes, dark and thoughtful, carried the weary wisdom of someone who had weathered storms few people could imagine. She had learned the art of observation from the periphery, the silent, unseen language of power dynamics, of subtle slights and unspoken hierarchies. The general manager, Patricia Mendez, descended the grand sweeping staircase as if she were making an entrance on a Broadway stage. Her heels clicked with a sharp, dry authority on the polished floor. Her bright red lipstick, a beacon of manufactured control in the sea of muted, corporate tones. "Good morning," she said, her voice a theatrical wave of calm that washed over the tense scene. She placed both hands on the reception desk, a gesture of command. "I'm the general manager here. How can we possibly help you, ma'am?" The Japanese woman did not respond. She did not even blink. Her stillness was an answer in itself, a silent, unyielding wall. "Ma'am," Patricia repeated, her voice a little firmer this time, the first crack appearing in her polished veneer. Still nothing. Patricia turned, giving her flustered staff a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's refusing to speak," she announced, her voice pitched just loud enough for the curious onlookers to hear. "This is unacceptable." The murmurs in the lobby grew, a low, buzzing hum of disapproval. From where she stood, Lucia felt the air shift. It was something deeper than confusion now. It was the familiar, ugly scent of contempt disguised as customer service, of fear masked by a thin veil of professionalism. Patricia leaned across the counter, her voice dropping to a low, condescending tone, the kind one uses with a disobedient child or a particularly slow-witted animal. "This is America, ma'am. If you want to be served here, you need to speak English." A beat of silence. Then, softly, but unmistakably, the Japanese woman exhaled. A single, silent sigh. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was deliberate, measured, and it sent a chill down Lucia's spine. It was the sound of a patience that was beginning to wear thin. The young assistant stepped forward nervously, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Please, she is not being difficult. She simply prefers to conduct formal business matters in her native language." "Formal?" Patricia let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like breaking glass. She shook her head, a gesture of theatrical disbelief for her audience. "We're not in Tokyo. If she wants towels or a bottle of champagne, she can point like everyone else, but she is holding up the check-in line for our other valued guests." It was then that Lucia dropped the cleaning cloth onto her cart. She didn't know why her feet were moving, they just were. Some old, dormant instinct had been awakened. Something in the Japanese woman's eyes, she couldn't name it, but she recognized it. It was the look of someone being weighed and measured on a scale they had never agreed to stand on. of being judged by a standard that had nothing to do with their true worth. It was a look Lucia knew intimately. Patricia, her patience finally exhausted, waved to a uniformed security guard who was hovering nearby. "Escort this person to the security office. We'll sort this out there." The woman's assistant stepped between them, his face pale with alarm. "Please, she is not causing any harm. She is one of Japan's most respected corporate executives. She is delaying service at a 5-star hotel," Patricia retorted, her voice cold and final. "We don't have time for guessing games and silent treatments." The woman's hand trembled slightly, a barely perceptible tremor, and then returned to its serene stillness. Her silence was not weakness. Lucia could see that now. It was a blade, held in reserve. That it was then that Lucia stepped forward, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the tense standoff. Everyone turned. Patricia blinked, her expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Miss Santos, this is not a cleaning issue." "I know," Lucia said simply. She turned to the Japanese guest. She offered a slight bow, a gesture so subtle, so perfect in its execution, that it was almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but was a clear signal to the woman it was intended for. And then, in fluent, soft, perfectly accented Japanese, she said, "Ohayo gozaimasu, Nakamura-sama, okawa, akaga desuka." "Good morning, Mrs. Nakamura. Would you care for a cup of tea?" Time stood still. The soft piano music that was being piped through the ceiling speakers seemed to vanish. The murmuring of the guests ceased. The frantic energy of the hotel staff dissipated into a cloud of stunned, silent shock. The Japanese woman's eyes widened, not dramatically, not with a gasp of surprise, but with the slow, dawning awakening of someone who, after a long and arduous journey, has finally been truly seen. She said something in Japanese, her voice quiet and melodic, a string of elegant, formal phrases. Lucia nodded. She gestured toward the quiet, secluded lounge area off the main lobby. "We can sit there," she said, switching back to English for the benefit of the stunned audience. "No pressure, no misunderstanding." The young assistant turned to the hotel staff, his mouth agape, stammering, She is talking to her perfectly, with a Kyoto accent." How Patricia's voice, when she finally found it, was a choked, strangled whisper. How do you even know Japanese?" "I don't think that's important right now," Lucia said gently, her gaze calm and steady. And there, in the center of the opulent lobby, before all the scornful, judgmental glances, she stood firm, a quiet, unassuming cleaning lady who was guarding a secret, far more powerful, far more valuable than any of the treasures locked away in the hotel's safes. While everyone had been mocking her position, underestimating her worth, her eyes revealed a deep, unshakable serenity. The serenity of someone who has faced far, far worse storms, and has lived to tell the tale. If this story of prejudice and quiet, unexpected power has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next, in the silent, unfolding battle of wits, between a humble cleaning lady and a corporate titan, would become the catalyst for a revolution that no one in that lobby, least of all the arrogant and dismissive Patricia Mendez, could have ever seen coming. The fine, bone-china teacup trembled slightly in Lucia's hand as she placed it on the low, polished mahogany table between them. It wasn't just tea, it was a ritual, a silent ceremony of respect and understanding that she hadn't performed in nearly a decade. The gesture was as natural to her as breathing, a piece of a life she had thought was long buried. Akiko Nakamura sat across from her in a plush armchair in the hotel's private lounge, a secluded oasis of calm away from the frantic energy of the lobby. Her posture was regal, her hands delicately folded in her lap. Her coat, still damp from the morning drizzle, was hung carefully over the arm of the chair beside her. But it wasn't her quiet elegance or the obvious expense of her understated attire that caught Lucia's attention. It was her restraint. There was a formidable power in the way she held her stillness, like a violin string tuned to the perfect pitch, ready to sing, but not to snap. "Arigato gozaimasu," Akiko said softly, her eyes downcast in a traditional gesture of respect. "Thank you for speaking with intention." Lucia nodded once, a small, acknowledging dip of her head. "It has been a while," she replied, also in Japanese. "My accent is probably rusty." "No," Akiko replied, her gaze lifting to meet Lucia's. "It is not rust. It is memory." A silence stretched between them, not an uncomfortable one, but a suspended, meaningful pause, like the breath a conductor takes before the first note of a symphony. Akiko studied her carefully, her sharp, intelligent eyes taking in the details of Lucia's simple uniform, the quiet confidence in her posture, the wisdom in her eyes. "You learned Japanese formally," Akiko said, switching to a careful, precise English, tinged with the soft, melodic accent of her native Kyoto. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "Kyoto University," Lucia replied, her voice even. "I was a professor of cultural linguistics for 7 years. My specialty was East Asian dynamics of silence." Akiko raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a gesture of mild, intrigued surprise. "I wrote my doctoral thesis on the phrase kuki wo yomu," Lucia added, a faint, wry smile touching her lips for the first time. "The art of reading the air." This earned her a whisper of a smile in return, a fleeting expression that was there and then gone, like a ripple on the surface of still water. "And now," Akiko said, her voice still soft, but with a genuine, probing curiosity, "a cleaning lady." "Now, a cleaning lady," Lucia confirmed, her gaze steady, without a hint of shame or apology, "at least, until someone finds out that I know more than just where the mops are kept." Across the hotel, in the sterile, intimidating confines of the executive office, Patricia Mendez was pacing behind her imposing mahogany desk like a caged tigress. The polished marble floor clicked and echoed with the frantic machine gun tap of her heels. She had locked herself in with 2 of her junior assistants and the hotel's public relations director, and the air was thick with a mixture of fury and panic. She completely disregarded the chain of command. Patricia hissed, her hands clenched into tight fists. "A cleaning lady has absolutely no authority to make executive decisions about high-level customer service." But she resolved the situation. "Patricia," one of the assistants murmured cautiously, immediately regretting it as Patricia's furious gaze snapped toward her. "She set a precedent," Patricia retorted, her voice rising. "If we allow lower-level, hourly employees to ignore established protocols just to put on some kind of cultural show, we completely lose control of the brand. We lose control of the narrative." The PR director, a nervous man with a perpetually worried expression, cleared his throat. "Technically, Patricia, she demonstrated excellent customer service. The guest felt she was being served by a cleaner." Patricia cut in, her voice sharp as a shard of glass. "It makes us look incompetent. It makes it look as if our highly trained professional staff wasn't capable of handling a basic situation. It undermines my authority." She stopped pacing abruptly and turned to her assistants. Her eyes narrowed. "I want a complete background check on this Santos woman, where she worked before, her education, her credit score, everything. And I want her in my office in 10 minutes. Back in the serene quiet of the lounge, Lucia poured herself a cup of the fragrant green tea, her movements precise and unhurried. Akiko watched her, and there was more than just interest in her gaze now. There was recognition. The recognition of a fellow warrior. Someone who understood the subtle, unspoken art of strategic patience. "Why hide?" Akiko asked softly, reverting to Japanese. Lucia looked down at the swirling green liquid in her cup, her voice growing quieter, more vulnerable. "After my wife died," she began, the words tasting strange and foreign after so many years of silence, "I needed a job where no one would ask me about my past, or my future. I needed a place to be invisible, a place where I could just be." Akiko's gaze softened, but she said nothing, allowing the silence to hold the weight of Lucia's confession. "Silence isn't always a retreat," Lucia continued, more to herself than to Akiko sometimes. "It's the only honest thing you have left." For a long moment, Akiko looked out the window at the rain-slicked streets, her fingers gently brushing the smooth, cool rim of her teacup. "In my country," she said, her voice a thoughtful, distant murmur, "we are taught that the most powerful person in the room is often the one who speaks last." Lucia let out a soft, humorless laugh. "In this country, it's usually the person who speaks the loudest who wins." Akiko turned back to her, her expression serious now. "And that is precisely why I stopped speaking English in my initial negotiations," she said. The words had become noise, they had become weapons. Negotiation should be about the meeting of intentions. But here, too often, it is about performance, about dominance. Lucia watched her, and there was more than just interest in her gaze now. It was recognition. She saw Akiko not as a billionaire CEO, but as a human being, a woman trying to protect something fragile and essential beneath the hard, polished surface of her corporate armor. She knew the feeling intimately. "You're not here just to sign a contract," Lucia said finally, her voice a statement of quiet, certain fact. "You're here to see who is willing to listen before they speak." Akiko's eyes met hers, and in that silent, shared gaze, she knew she was right. It was at that moment that Patricia's loud, imperious voice echoed down the hall. "Santos, my office, now." Lucia sighed. The brief moment of peace shattered. She started to get up, but Akiko placed a delicate, restraining hand on her arm. "Excuse me," Akiko said, her voice still soft, but now imbued with an unmistakable, steely authority that made Lucia pause. "Miss Santos is currently assisting me. If Ms. Mendez wishes to speak with her, she can schedule an appointment after our meeting is complete." Patricia appeared in the doorway of the lounge, her face a mask of contained, furious indignation. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Santos is a hotel employee, and Akiko interrupted calmly, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more commanding than a shout. "I'm Akiko Nakamura, the CEO of Nakamura Technologies. My company is currently considering a $50 million investment in your hotel group's expansion on the East Coast." She paused, letting the words land with the force of a physical blow. "The quality of your customer service will, of course, be a crucial factor in that decision." Patricia's face went a shade of white that was whiter than the marble floors. Lucia remained seated, but something new flickered in her eyes. It was not submission. It was not fear. It was the look of a chess player who has just realized that she is not fighting alone, but a powerful, unexpected piece has just been placed on her side of the board. "Of course," Patricia murmured, forcing a smile that was a grotesque parody of her earlier confidence. "My apologies. I will be sure not to interrupt again." When Patricia had retreated down the hallway, her footsteps echoing with a new, uncertain rhythm, Akiko turned to Lucia with a look that was a mixture of wry amusement and something deeper, something akin to respect. "50 million, Lucia?" asked in Japanese, a hint of a smile in her voice. 80, actually, Akiko replied, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "But I thought it would be polite to underestimate." They laughed together, a quiet, shared sound of two women from different worlds who had just found a common language, a common cause, and for the first time that day, the silence between them didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like an alliance. But as Patricia Mendez walked away down the long, empty hallway, her footsteps, a sinister, echoing promise of retribution, knew that this was far from over. What Patricia didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly know, was that in her clumsy, arrogant attempt to humiliate her in front of a guest, she had just awakened something that had been dormant for years, the fighting spirit of a woman who had already lost everything once, and had lived to tell the story. Each new humiliation, each condescending glance, had only served to strengthen something deep inside Lucia that her oppressors couldn't see, a silent, unbending force, fueled by the very injustice they sought to impose. What people like Patricia Mendez didn't know was that every act of contempt was just another line in the story of their own downfall. And when Lucia had lowered her head slightly under the weight of their censorious glances, everyone had thought they had broken her spirit. But those who know true strength know that it grows best in silence, in the quiet, unseen places where the most devastating storms are conceived. Patricia Mendez's office was a monument to corporate intimidation. The floor was polished black marble. The walls were covered with framed diplomas and industry awards, and the desk, a massive slab of dark, imposing mahogany, was positioned in such a way that it made her look like a judge about to deliver a sentence. Lucia entered the room with the quiet, upright posture of someone who had faced far more threatening tribunals. "Sit down," Patricia ordered, not looking up from the papers she was shuffling. A deliberate power play. "I prefer to stand." "Thank you," Lucia replied calmly, her voice even and steady. Patricia finally looked up, her eyes narrowed with irritation at this small, unexpected act of defiance. "Very well. Let's get straight to the point. Your behavior today was completely and utterly inappropriate. You violated at least a dozen hotel protocols. You disrespected the established hierarchy, and you embarrassed the entire management team in front of a potential major investor." "I helped a guest who was being mistreated," Lucia stated, her voice a simple, unadorned declaration of fact. "You interfered in a situation that was not your concern." Patricia slammed her hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent, cavernous office. "A cleaning lady has no authority to make decisions about high-level customer service." Lucia allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch her lips. "And who, precisely, would have the appropriate authority?" "The person who is about to call security on a guest who has booked the presidential suite for a week." Patricia's face flushed a deep mottled red. "Don't be insolent with me. I know your type." You think you can do whatever you want and then cry prejudice when you're called out on it. An interesting perspective, Lucia murmured, but her eyes, which had been calm and observant, now flashed with something Patricia couldn't quite identify. A flicker of something sharp, something dangerous. Let me be perfectly clear, Patricia continued, leaning across the desk, her voice a low, menacing hiss. You will write a formal, public apology to the entire front desk staff. You will return to your cleaning duties, and you will never, ever approach a guest again without express written permission from me. And if I hear so much as a whisper about you speaking any of your little foreign languages with the guests, you will be out on the street the very same day. Do I make myself clear? Lucia nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I understand, perfectly. Patricia smiled a tight, triumphant smile, believing she had re-established her dominance, that she had crushed this small, insignificant rebellion. Good. Now get back to work. You have floors to scrub. But as Lucia reached the door, she paused and turned back. May I ask you a question, Ms. Mendez? What? Patricia snapped, her patience clearly at an end. Have you ever been to Japan? Patricia frowned, confused by the non sequitur. What does that have to do with anything? Just curious, Lucia said, a strange, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. I'm sure you would really appreciate the culture, especially the concept of nemawashi. It's nothing important, Lucia replied, stepping out of the office and closing the door softly behind her, leaving Patricia alone in her marble fortress, a seed of unease planted in her mind. Nemawashi, the informal behind-the-scenes process of consensus building, of laying the groundwork for a major decision. 3 hours later, in Lucia's modest one-bedroom apartment, two women sat at a small, cluttered kitchen table. The air was thick with the fragrant steam of freshly brewed green tea. Akiko Nakamura had changed out of her formal business suit and into a simple, elegant set of casual clothes, but her presence still commanded a quiet, powerful respect. Did she threaten you directly? Akiko asked, pouring tea from a thermos. She had brought with her a gesture of quiet, domestic intimacy that belied her corporate stature. Patricia isn't subtle, Lucia replied, a wry smile on her lips. But she isn't smart either. She just gave me exactly what I needed. Akiko raised a questioning eyebrow. Lucia stood up and walked over to a small, unassuming metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. From inside, she pulled out a thick, meticulously organized folder. 7 months of documentation, she said, placing the folder on the table with a soft, definitive thud. She opened it. Inside were incident reports, photocopies of internal emails, photographs taken discreetly with a cell phone, and handwritten notes. Everything was catalogued with the cool, academic precision of the professor she once was. March 12th, said, pointing to a photograph of a guest registration screen. An Arab client, a Mr. Al-Jamil, was accidentally on purpose placed in a room on the top floor, directly next to the noisy elevator engine room, even though he had booked and paid for a quiet junior suite. Here, she pointed to another document, is an internal email from Patricia instructing the front desk staff that any clients with difficult-to-pronounce names should be directed to the lower category rooms on the west wing, even if they have paid for upgrades. To minimize potential service complications, Akiko leafed through the pages, her expression growing increasingly serious, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. My God, Lucia, she murmured. This is systematic. This is a pattern. 7 months of collecting evidence, Lucia confirmed. Patricia regularly engages in racial and linguistic discrimination, but always in a way that is subtle, enough to give her plausible deniability until today. What changed today? Akiko asked, her eyes fixed on Lucia's. Lucia smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Today, she threatened me, in front of witnesses, for helping a Japanese guest, and today, she took out her smartphone and played the audio file of her conversation in Patricia's office. I recorded it. Patricia's voice, sharp and laced with venom, echoed clearly in the small kitchen. I know your type. You think you can do whatever you want, and then cry prejudice when you're called out on it. Akiko leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. That is unacceptable, but it's still her word against yours. Her lawyers will try to tear you apart. I know, Lucia said. It's not enough. I need something bigger. Something she can't deny. Something she can't minimize or explain away. Akiko studied her carefully, a new level of respect dawning in her eyes. You have a plan. I have 2 options, Lucia said, closing the folder with a soft, final snap. The first is to sue the hotel for racial discrimination and wrongful termination. With this evidence and your testimony, it's a guaranteed victory, a settlement, a quiet apology. And the second option, Akiko asked, leaning forward, Intrigued, Lucia's eyes flashed with an intensity that made Akiko's breath catch in her throat. The second option, she said, her voice a low, steady hum of contained power, is to give Patricia Mendez exactly what she deserves. A lesson in humility that she will never, ever forget. Explain. Lucia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, glittering city below. You said you're considering an $80 million investment in the hotel's expansion, correct? Yes. And how many hotels are on your shortlist? 3. The Imperial is one of them. Lucia turned, a slow, predatory smile growing on her lips. Patricia doesn't know that you have that kind of decision-making power, does she? To her, you're just another wealthy, non-English speaking Japanese guest who needs to be managed. Akito began to understand. A slow, appreciative smile mirrored Lucia's. Go on. What would happen? Lucia mused, her voice a soft, silken thread of strategic genius. If, during an official high-stakes inspection by your company, Patricia were to publicly demonstrate the very same discriminatory behavior she has been practicing in private for months, it would be the end of her career, Akiko said slowly, the full, beautiful scope of the plan dawning on her. It would be corporate suicide. Exactly, Lucia said. But it would have to be something so blatant, so undeniable, that even the most ruthless corporate lawyers couldn't spin it. Akiko was silent for a long moment, her sharp mind processing the variables, the risks, the potential rewards. Then, she looked at Lucia, her eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and excitement. What do you need from me? Just be yourself, Lucia replied. A powerful Japanese CEO, evaluating a multi-million-dollar investment. And trust me when I tell you that it's time to act, and you are sure this will work. Lucia picked up her smartphone again and showed Akiko a short video she had recorded discreetly a month earlier. On the screen, Patricia Mendez could be seen clearly, instructing a young, nervous front desk employee. If these types of customers complain about the service, Patricia's voice said, dripping with condescension, you just pretend you don't understand and send them to the competition. It's better to lose one problematic customer than to have to deal with all their fussiness. I am absolutely sure, Lucia said, turning off the device. That night, while Akiko returned to her presidential suite at the Imperial Hotel, Lucia stayed up late, meticulously organizing her files. Every document, every photograph, every audio recording was reviewed, catalogued, and prepared. She had learned in her academic life that the most powerful research wasn't just about collecting data, it was about knowing exactly how, and more importantly, when to present it. The difference between her and Patricia Mendez was not just about education, or social class, or skin color. It was that Patricia systematically, pathologically, underestimated anyone she considered inferior, while Lucia, a woman who had been rendered invisible by society, had learned to observe, to analyze, and to act with the surgical, devastating precision of a master strategist. As she organized the documents in chronological order, Lucia smiled at the thought of Patricia's face when she finally discovered that the simple cleaning lady she had tried to humiliate had meticulously, patiently, orchestrated her own spectacular downfall. Under the weight of all the condescending looks she had endured over the past 7 months, her hands trembled slightly as she held the papers that would change everything. But anyone watching closely would have noticed that it was not fear that made those hands tremble. It was the contained humming power of someone who was about to rewrite her own story, and in doing so, teach a lesson in justice that would echo through the corporate corridors of the Imperial Hotel for years to come. The next morning, the lobby of the Imperial Hotel buzzed with a new, palpable energy. A team of executives in impeccable dark suits, tablets in hand, and serious, focused expressions on their faces, moved through every corner of the hotel like a swarm of well-dressed hornets. The official inspection by Nakamura Technologies had begun, and Patricia Mendez, preening and puffed up with self-importance, could barely contain her excitement. $80 million, she muttered to herself as she adjusted her blazer. For the 5th time in as many minutes, an $80 million direct investment. Akiko Nakamura walked through the lobby with a team of 3 of her top evaluators, all of them Japanese, examining every detail of the hotel's operation. With a cool, detached professionalism, Patricia followed her like an anxious, yapping shadow, her smile stretched to a painful, unnatural width, her gestures exaggerated and theatrical. As you can see, Ms. Nakamura, Patricia said, her voice a full octave higher than usual, our clientele is extremely international. We pride ourselves on serving people from all cultures with the same unwavering standard of excellence. Lucia watched the performance from across the lobby, pretending to polish an already gleaming decorative vase. She had coordinated the plan carefully with Akiko the night before. The CEO had requested that the inspection include a unannounced assessment of the hotel's customer service, specifically with guests who did not appear to speak English fluently. Perfect, Akiko had said, a dangerous glint in her eye. I want to see how your team reacts when they believe there are no consequences for their actions. The first test came in disguise. One of Akiko's top evaluators, a man named Hiroshi, approached the front desk, his face a mask of confusion and distress. He began asking questions in rapid-fire Japanese, gesturing frantically toward the bank of elevators. I'm sorry, sir, the young receptionist said, her face paling with nervousness. We don't understand you, Patricia. Eva the Hanzo manager quickly swooped in, her forced smile already showing signs of strain. Is there a problem here? Hiroshi continued his performance, his voice growing more agitated, pointing to a piece of paper with a series of room numbers written on it. Look, Patricia said, her voice already losing its manufactured cordiality, her patience wearing thin. If you cannot communicate in English, perhaps you should consider staying at a hotel that offers more specialized assistance. Across the lobby, Akiko, who was pretending to examine a floral arrangement, gave Lucia an almost imperceptible signal. The hidden cameras her aides had strategically placed around the lobby were recording everything. But Patricia, blinded by her own arrogance and the stress of the inspection, didn't stop there. Seeing that the guest continued to insist in Japanese, her mask of professionalism finally, spectacularly, slipped. My God, she said, turning to the receptionist with an exasperated eye-rolling expression, her voice a loud, carrying whisper. Why do these types of people always choose to stay at American hotels if they can't even be bothered to learn how to ask for a glass of water properly? The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Even the regular guests, the ones not involved in the inspection, stopped to watch the unfolding scene. Hiroshi, a master of his craft, continued his performance, now discreetly recording the blatant discrimination on his own smartphone. I cannot waste my time with this, Patricia continued, her voice rising, her face flushing with irritation. We have real Japanese investors to impress today. We can't be seen wasting our time with every confused tourist who wanders in here speaking a language that nobody understands. It was at that moment that Lucia approached calm and unhurried, carrying her cleaning supplies as if she were simply going about her daily duties. Excuse me, she said softly. May I help? Patricia turned, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Santos, I told you not to meddle in. But Lucia ignored her completely. She addressed Hiroshi directly, her voice a calm, reassuring balm in the tense atmosphere. In fluent, perfect Japanese, she said. Ohayo, gozai do nazai mashita. Ka, good morning. How may I assist you? Hiroshi replied in Japanese, explaining his feigned problem with the elevator keycard. Lucia nodded, and then calmly, patiently, guided him to the correct elevator, chatting fluently with him all the way. Patricia stood there, speechless, watching the scene. When Lucia returned, she exploded. I told you not to do that, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the now silent lobby, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. You are a cleaner, a simple, black cleaner who should be scrubbing toilets, not playing translator for the guests. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that lobby, the guests, the employees, Akiko's team of evaluators, froze completely. Patricia's words, raw and ugly and filled with years of pent-up prejudice, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. It was a public confession of everything she truly thought, of everything she had been practicing in private for years. It was then that Akiko Nakamura emerged from the shadows, walking slowly, deliberately, toward Patricia, her expression a chilling mixture of profound disappointment and cold, contained fury. Ms. Mendez, Akiko said, her voice now imperfect, unaccented English, as cold and as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. I am Akiko Nakamura, the CEO of Nakamura Technologies. Patricia's face went through a series of rapid, horrifying transformations, from red to white to a pale, sickly green. Ms. Nakamura. I didn't know you were. You speak English? Yes, I do. Akiko finished for her. Just as I speak Japanese, Mandarin, Korean, and French. But I often choose to use my native language when I want to assess the true character of the people with whom I am considering doing business. Patricia tried to stammer out an explanation, an apology, anything, but Akiko raised a single, elegant hand, silencing her. Over the past 48 hours, Akiko continued, her voice a low, devastating indictment, my team has systematically documented 7 separate instances of racial discrimination, 12 cases of linguistic prejudice, and at least 3 direct civil rights violations committed by you and your management team. She gestured, and her aides stepped forward. There, tablets and cameras held high. We have audio recordings of you instructing your employees to redirect problematic customers with hard-to-pronounce names. We have video evidence of you directing that guests of certain ethnicities be placed in lower-tier rooms, regardless of what they paid for. And now Akiko paused, letting the full weight of her next words land. We have your own public, unambiguous confession of racial bias, recorded by at least 16 different people, and which is, as we speak, being broadcast live on our corporate social media channels. Patricia staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth, a look of pure, unadulterated horror on her face. That was a misunderstanding. No, Lucia said calmly, stepping forward and handing Patricia a thick, heavy folder. This was 7 months of systematic documentation of your discriminatory practices. Patricia opened the folder, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it. Page after page of her own sins, her own prejudice, her own casual cruelty, stared back at her, all meticulously organized, dated, and annotated. You're fired, effective immediately. A new voice, deep and authoritative, cut through the silence. The hotel's regional director had arrived, his face a grim, stony mask. He had clearly been informed of the unfolding disaster, and our company will now be facing a federal discrimination lawsuit that you, and you alone, have created. But I can explain. Patricia tried, her voice now a desperate, pathetic whisper. No need, Akiko said, her voice cold and final. Your actions have already explained everything. As to security guards, the very same security she had threatened to call on a Japanese guest just 2 days earlier, gently but firmly escorted a sobbing, hysterical Patricia Mendez out of the hotel. Lucia remained in the center of the lobby. She was no longer invisible. She was surrounded by looks of awe, of admiration, of profound respect. The regional director approached her, extending his hand. Dr. Santos, he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. We would like to talk to you about a management position, a new position, in charge of diversity and inclusion, with a salary that properly reflects your qualifications. Lucia smiled softly. Thank you, but I believe I already have a better offer. Akiko approached, placing a gentle, supportive hand on Lucia's shoulder. Nakamura Technologies is creating a new global corporate ethics department, she announced to the stunned onlookers. We would like Dr. Santos to lead it. As the grand glass doors of the Imperial Hotel closed behind Patricia Mendez for the last time, Lucia looked around the opulent lobby where she had been humiliated, dismissed, and rendered invisible so many times. Now, every employee, every guest, every person present knew exactly who she really was. The woman who had been called a mere black cleaning lady had methodically, brilliantly, orchestrated the downfall of the person who had discriminated against her, using intelligence, patience, and a sense of justice as precise and as effective as a surgeon's scalpel. Patricia Mendez had lost not only her job, but her entire reputation, her entire career, while Lucia, the unseen observer, the silent witness, had emerged as the heroine who had exposed an entire system of institutional prejudice. But while everyone celebrated justice being served, something even bigger, even more profound, was about to be revealed. A connection between Lucia and Akiko, a shared history that would transform not only their personal lives, but would create a corporate revolution that would forever change the way companies around the world thought about diversity, inclusion, and the simple, profound power of seeing the person, not the uniform. 6 months later, Lucia Santos sat in her new corner office on the top floor of the Nakamura Technologies headquarters in Tokyo. A panoramic view of the glittering, sprawling city spread out before her. As the global director of corporate ethics and inclusion, she had already designed and implemented new, revolutionary diversity and cultural sensitivity programs in 43 of the company's international subsidiaries, completely transforming the organizational culture of each one. Patricia Mendez, she had learned, never got another job in the hotel industry. The video of her racist tirade had become a viral sensation, a case study taught in business schools and corporate HR departments around the world on how not to behave. The last Lucia had heard, She was working as a salesperson in a mid-range department store in a small, forgotten town in the Midwest, earning less in a month than Lucia now earned in a single day. The Imperial Hotel, its reputation in tatters, had been acquired by Nakamura Technologies for a fraction of its former value. It was now being completely rebranded and remodeled, set to become a global benchmark for inclusive, culturally sensitive hospitality. A large, elegant plaque was being installed in the main lobby, a plaque that honored the contributions of all the hardworking, often invisible people who fight daily against prejudice and discrimination in the workplace. Akiko and Lucia had developed not only an extraordinary professional partnership but a deep, abiding friendship that transcended cultures, languages, and backgrounds. Together they had proven that a true revolution can begin with a single, quiet act of courage. The best revenge was not destroying Patricia, Lucia had said to Akiko one evening, as they shared a quiet dinner overlooking the Imperial Palace Gardens. It was building something better, something she could never have even imagined. Lucia had learned that when you respond to prejudice not with anger, but with intelligence, with dignity, with a meticulously documented case of irrefutable truth, you not only defeat your enemies, you inspire others to fight as well. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their position, their language, or the color of their skin, subscribe to the channel, share in the comments if you have ever faced prejudice and how you reacted. Together we can create a world where a person's character matters more than any label that others try to put on them.